Are you feeling stifled, worn out, or just bored with your 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 job? I want you to know that you're not alone. I was there too till I started asking and wondering if there was another way to live and work where I could actually be more of me. In this episode, I bring to you real conversations with real people who have chosen to step out of their 9 to 5 employment and create a life for themselves that is more in line with their inner rhythm. Hi, Sonia. Good afternoon. And thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on this show. Uh, I know you've had a very interesting life and a very interesting career, and it would be such a contribution to hear from you. And yeah, we're going to take it as we talk, walking you through your own journey and you having share with us, the different steps and the inner and outer work that you've been doing on yourself as you've embarked on this. So thank you so much. So, as a first starting pace, because I know you, but a lot of our viewers would not. So, do you want to, tell us a bit about where you were originally in terms of a standard 9 to 5, regular job? What was your role? What were you doing? How was life then? And when did the thought first start coming that you could create something different for yourself?
So thanks, Ramya, for inviting me. And I'm so delighted to be part of this conversation on a subject that's just so relevant. So, yes, to go back into the 9 to 5, and it feels like ancient history now because it was so long ago. And this was I had decided in the very wise way that completely young thoughtless people have, that I would plan my life and I would put on my CV 4 years of experience before I took a break for a sabbatical. So accordingly, I spent 2 years in banking and 2 years in a consumer marketing company, and both were interesting. And I was marketing bone china tableware. So this was the Tata Ceramics brand, and it was very interesting because it's a new brand, and we were launching it in export markets and in India as well. So that's where I was with the 9 to 5, and I was going to take a 5 year sabbatical and then go back into industry. So, and then, life kind
And
of.
what was your thought? So not everyone plans in a 5 year sabbatical. So I'm really curious to know what was in the head of the younger version of you then when you had even the thought of just planning in a sabbatical.
So, Ramya had started with a story, and this was something a senior of mine was chatting with us about, and she'd had a baby, and I remember working at Citibank. So she said that that she was talking about her maternity leave, and she said, yeah, that's fine, they give you 3 weeks, 3 months, I beg your pardon, and that's good, but then when those 3 months are done, you're expected to just show up and be like there as if your baby doesn't exist. And she'd had a time where she was, she'd kind of struggled to finish all her work and get it all done and leave the office at 5:30, and she said, there's this group of guys lounging outside drinking chai or whatever, and they're like, oh, you're leaving already? And she said, I was so upset, just that tone. And really, there's nothing offensive about saying you're leaving already. I mean, just the words, right? But it sort of hit her because the subtext is that, yeah, like, you're not serious about your work. And I listened to this and I decided that I didn't want to be doing this. And I said, okay, so I'm going to take a break of 5 years off so that I don't have to get caught into this spiral of, trying to be seen to work and look after baby. So that accounted for that decision.
Lovely. And then what happened?
So we suddenly moved from being dinks, double income, no kids, to sink, single income and numerous kids, because we had our first daughter, and then we had our second, and then we later had our third. So I started to miss reading books, because in those days books were quite expensive. And obviously they were seen as a luxury, and they came clearly after food and drink and diapers and things like that. So I hit upon this idea that why don't I review books? So, magazines like, say, India Today or newspapers would send me the Deccan Herald or the Hindu. They'd send me a book by post, and I'd get this book, I'd get to read it, I'd write a review, and I would get paid for it also. And I was like, okay, win-win. So that's how I started to write. And that was strictly a part-time.
Do that. How did you do that, Sonya? Because it's not so easy to get requests to review from, the well-known magazines and newspapers. So what was the work that you had to do? Because you were in the industry with a management degree, very different from what, a book reviewer would be expected to have. So how did you navigate that? And what is the work you needed to do there?
So, and Ramya, the first assignment was hard to get. And once you get one, then the rest just fall into place. So that I remember, that was a mixture of luck, because I think that I kind of pitched this, and I'd spend a long time writing an email, and I'd try to get it, try to sort of showcase my writing skills in the email, and maybe refer to a few other books I've read, and try to put in a few adjectives. So I did all of those things, and I think something clicked, because I did get, I got a book review in India Today, and later I realized that it was one of those books that probably, it was so boring that none of the, the staffers, full-time people wanted to read. So they would, I got that, but I was thrilled. And so once I got one, then when you have a proof, to show, then it becomes much easier to get the others. Also, what I also did was I'd send feature ideas on books. So I remember I was at that time doing a lot of fairy tales, reading out fairy tales to my children, and I found them so violent and gruesome. And I started to research that, why these kids are tiny, and you're telling them stories where, the child is taking the witch's head in Hansel and Gretel and shoving it into an oven. And what is all this violence about? And then I discovered this book by Bruno Bettelheim, and it was called The Uses of Enchantment. And it talked about why, scientifically speaking, that violence is so necessary. And this I pitched as a feature to the Hindu Literary Review. And so they liked the idea. So it was all of these things. I was writing about books, and I was also doing book reviews, and so that just kind of happened.
Wow. So, so Sonya, one of the things that's really standing out to me in your journey is how, when you started doing this completely new thing in the world of books and the reviews, how you were constantly learning, and you followed your curiosity, even, in terms of why is there violence, and then understanding, and then pitching, like an iterative approach, almost like a flow of your learning and your creation and your exploration going on together. And I can see the joy of that on your face. And just, want to know if you have something else to share around that, especially in the context of something that I see holds a lot of people back. It's held me back in the past. It still holds me back when I think of doing new things, which is, we consider ourselves experts in what we've already done, where we've got our degrees and where we have our experience, and we've achieved some fair degree of mastery and performance. And then you're doing something new like this, where it's more of, you're just learning, following your intuitions, experimenting, pitching, trying. And you're a newbie. You're not a master in the field. You're not a master in literature, but you're, you have all these ideas. So tell me a little about how you did the internal trade-offs between both those states of being and working, because you have to give something else up in order to be in that space of, innocent, joyful, spontaneous exploration.
So, Ramya, I have a confession to make.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, in retrospect, I'm enjoying it a lot more than at that point. Okay. And I also find, so at that point, I was quite apologetic about it. And having done an MBA, I benchmarked myself with my colleagues. So this was just I put it as a hobby, and I wasn't very serious about it in that sense. I mean, I was serious in terms of the effort that I put, but I wouldn't really put it on my CV, so to speak. I didn't consider it a serious accomplishment. There's a pecking order. And in those days, it was a very strong pecking order. So for instance, another thing that I did was that I wrote a lot on parenting, but I think I had a secret kind of longing that I wanted to be like a Gyan and Ramesh and write like, on the stock market for the FT rather than write a parenting piece for Mint.
Because you were an MBA and you'd worked in a bank, and that is the expected thing that MBAs who worked in banks do.
And always the world of finance was something that was like way higher than the world of parenting. So I wrote what I knew and I was investigating in, but I really didn't think it was like a big deal. And actually quite the contrary. I was very apologetic about it, in the sense that in my own head, I kind of didn't think that it was great at all.
Wow. Thank you for sharing this. And I so resonate with that, because I've been there as well, being apologetic and thinking of things. It's just this other thing that I do that I don't even talk about. And then they've actually become, integral parts of our lives. And what this reminds me of really is about, how we are actually crafting our identities inside as we are playing and crafting with the world outside, and actually what we're doing. And just in terms of shifting your own identity from an MBA who's supposed to be writing finance pieces, to giving yourself the permission to be you and write pieces about the things that fascinate you and engage you and entice you. And I know this journey does play out organically, but I'm also curious, to know more about that inner journey. And along that journey, were there people who helped you? And it could be friends, coaches, mentors, or, role models, or it could also be, did you do something consciously in terms of letting go of blocks, beliefs, assumptions? Anything that you can share there?
So that's a very profound question, and it's complex as well, in the sense it's complex and comprehensive. You're looking at both the internal movement and the external. So for me, I think I had like a couple of issues that have kind of dogged me for years, and they're all part of the same basket. And one was, and it started very early. It started with the subject that I studied in college, and it was, I did English literature, and it was
you did
in Delhi University. And it was a good degree, and I enjoyed it, and I did very well at it. However, the catch was that, colloquially speaking, it was called the marriage degree, because a lot of women would use that degree as a placeholder, so to speak, and do the degree for 3 years and then go get married. And this tag bothered me immensely. So for so long, I was just so apologetic about the fact that I had studied literature. So that was one. And the second was this dread that I had of being tagged a dabbler or a dilettante, doing so many different things. So I've not only been a banker, I've worked in consumer marketing, I've been a teacher, I've been a journalist, but I've not had a single beat. I have written on books, I've written on art, I've written on food, I've written on entertainment. So this bothered me, because I felt that I don't have this whole deep dive kind of skill that I can, this expertise. And I think, and this was obviously, all in my head. So, but it was a very strong part. And what helped me, I wish I could say it was me, and I did this great work on myself. What helped me was that, Ramya, somewhere along the way, the world turned.
Wow.
The world turned, and suddenly there was a huge realization that liberal arts matter. And there was art. It took artificial intelligence, ironically, for this to come about. And as a journalist, I would write for Mint on the nature of work and how things were changing. And this was this very popular sort of trope, an article that everybody wanted to read: how to future-proof your career. Will robots send you out of work or not? And so I talked to people and thinkers and entrepreneurs, and the refrain that came out was that what's important is liberal arts, the ability to empathize, caring. These skills are going to be important, not the banker like Excel sheet kind of skills. And there were books, for instance, that would actually get into all of this and do the research and put it out very fluently, very articulately, with analysis that was quite incisive and very fascinating. So that helped. The outer world turned, and then there were like a few other things. I think so. The environment was right, the atmosphere was right, and then there were a few things that triggered it for me. So, for instance, when I was writing the introduction to my book, and my book is called Career Rules. It's on different careers, whether you look at data analytics or the government, or it's part of the column that I used to write for Mint. So in the introduction, I was writing about my own career. And suddenly it struck me that the word that I had in my head, dabble, or this whole dilettante thing, was no longer that. Now it was a strength, because it was the ability to pivot. And the word pivot, which never existed 15 years ago, was now something that everybody was looking for. Venture capitalists were looking for it, employers were looking for it. It was the ability to pivot. And suddenly I was like, yes, I have pivoted. I haven't dabbled. So that helped. And then I did a lot of reading on all of these things. So that was reinforced. But I mean, it's just good luck from that point of view that I was able to do that and deal with these issues.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I love the way you've explained this, really, that in your choosing to write about the things that mattered, you were pretty much driven by your sense of what you wanted to do. And it just so happened that, the world around started growing up, if I may use that, and opening its receptivity to receive someone like you who was doing that. So wonderful. And I think that this is going to be such a gift for, our viewers, especially those who are still in the early stages of their career, and perhaps they realize that they're sort of, stuck in a place of doing something that sort of, where their heart doesn't sing, where they don't come alive, and sort of having that faith. And faith is, I think, not the right word here, but having that guts, really, or making that choice that to honor that, knowing that it may or may not work out in terms of the external world catching up. But even if the external world hadn't caught up, you were still being you. And you were still displaying that strength and embodying that strength of resilience and pivoting. And now we recognize it as a strength, but you were doing that even when it wasn't what the world was asking for us to showcase in our CVs as a strength. So thank you for sharing that. Wonderful. So I have another question for you, which is just in terms of, we talked about the inner journey and the, shifting of labels, which sometimes happen by themselves and sometimes we change. In terms of the external world, in terms of reaching out to people, networking, or, even like prototype experiences, which might be the same as dabbling, trying something out and seeing if it works. One article, did it work? And then expanding that. Would you have something to share based on your experience in that for people who are trying to just do something different and try their hands out at multiple things?
So Ramya, I was very lucky in that, because as a journalist, you may not get paid a lot, but you get to interview some very interesting people. And so this is what in fact, I think you spoke about mentors, and I was just reflecting on it and thinking that my mentors were strangely a lot of the people I interviewed. And I talked to them, and and the interview actually had questions like, what have been your learnings? What is the advice that you would like to give our readers? What were your pain points? What were the what are you glad that you did? What would you do differently? So they were very analytical interviews, and very, very applied, so to speak. And I just come away, and because I enjoy books so much, that would be always one of my questions, like, what are you reading? What would you recommend? And we would trade book lists as well. And I remember, some of the interviews, I remember meeting Shrikant Velakamani from the founder of Fractal. And he was doing a lot of analytics and behavioral analytics. And he was reading a lot of behavioral economics. And he gave me 2-3 titles, and he said Cialdini and Kahneman and all those. And that was and this was about maybe 10 years ago. And that was when I started to read these subjects. And it was like a whole new world for me. And I remember reading Misbehaving, and then by Thaler, which is again very, very brilliant and amazingly well written. The Undoing Project, which was fiction, but by Michael Lewis, but on the lives of Kahneman and Tversky. So there were all these books that I would read, and I would be exposed to their ideas. And there was, like, say, Pranay Chile, who was talking about how Quicker came about, how he did, and there's a lovely story about that. You'll find, if you Google Pranay Chile and Live Mint, you'll find it online. So there was a lot of kind of ideas and stimulus and life advice that I would get from these people. And so that helped. Then there were odd other things that I would just do. And at that time, I wasn't really conscious that I am getting that much from it. So say I live in Juhu. And so I decided I'd be part of this Juhu citizens movement. And I was writing a story, and I said, okay, I also decided to join them for a bit. And that itself was amazing, because I looked at self-government, and there were the issues that the city faces. And then I began to write a column a neighborhood column for Mumbai Mirror on neighborhood issues. So I think that I would say it's sometimes you just go towards things and you don't know where they lead. But if you're interested in a particular thing, if you're looking at heritage, there are lots of, say, now you've got things like khaki tours, and you've got other heritage walks in say, different cities. So you go on those. Or if you're interested in birding, maybe join somebody who's doing a birding walk. And one thing leads to the other. And you just, you don't know when you walk into it, what doors, what windows, what French windows it'll open out. But it's worth exploring.
Beautiful. Thank you. And, Sonia, as you were sharing your experience, the imagery that I got really was about you interviewing all these different people as a part of the work you were doing. But each interview literally opening up a brand new window for you, new possibilities, new learning, and the other one about just going around and, keeping yourself active and engaged and exploring different things without really, having a complete plan that I do this and this will lead me to this and this, but just being open to possibilities. And that is such a fascinating lesson in itself. And your life is such a testimonial of that approach of just being open to possibilities, doing what you might feel curious about, or what feels like fun, or what calls you, like the citizens movement in, Juhu, and then seeing what that opens up and what that teaches you. Thanks so much for that. I'm going to ask you another question, which is a sort of tricky question, but I'm asking this because I just find a lot of people, including my own coaching clients, stuck on this one, which is, the difference between a full-time job, a paid job, 9 to 5 or 9 to 9, whatever, and doing something on your own in different ways is really that fixed income stream that we call a salary, right? It's almost like an addiction where no matter what, when things go up and down, as they will, and you still have that amount coming in through the bank, which you don't hear. So how did you reconcile with that internally, externally, and what would be your any pieces of advice or experience on that?
So Ramya, that's such a good question and so relevant. And for me, losing out on a monthly salary was really, really hard. I just found it very hard. And that's again something that I struggled with for a long time. And I remember at one point, feeling really upset, having this sudden thing that, I am a cost center. I'm not a profit center in this family unit that we have, this marriage, and I'm feeling really upset about it. So I think, and you know how it is, Ramya, even in a corporate, the profit centers are the most glamorous.
Has the upper hand.
And the
You're taught that, right? Yeah.
And I would feel that I was the less powerful person. What helped me come to terms with, so I mean, I had saved a certain amount, and when we had double incomes and no kids, we really saved lots of money, right? So I had the kind of a very, very small nest egg, but it was there. And that made me, feel that, okay, fine, if I really want to splurge on something which I think is not fair, but I want to indulge myself, I can. So there was that. But what helped me was actually, Ramya, I started to read a lot on the costs of motherhood and the contribution of motherhood. And then I began to read, and I realized that our whole economic system is really faulty. Economists have no way of measuring the economic cost of child rearing. It does not figure in the GDP. I mean, that's just ridiculous that we don't have a system where you can actually look at that. And because we don't measure it or give it value, we don't put space in our head for it. There are no laws. I mean, it's just basically, if you're not paid as a child minder or a child educator, you are not creating value as far as the monetary economy is concerned. So I think I had to do a lot of internal thinking about it, and I did read a lot on it. And then I'd read books like, say, Marianne Slaughter, and there's a lot of amazing writing now on this subject. That helped me. And then I began to, in my head, say that, okay, this cost center, profit center is all rubbish. And so here we're looking at a primary parent and a primary wage earner. And so at no point does the other parent feel, in a two-parent family, at no point does the other parent feel that they're half a parent. So I shouldn't really feel conscious about this. And it also helped that, we had gone beyond those years where money, where we had to think, okay, fine, do we put this check in at this point? Will it bounce or not? So, money was not such a constraint. And so I didn't have to kind of really obsess about, do I need to spend money on, this outfit? After all, I'm not going to go into an office every day. So am I justified? And
wow.
So that was an issue. And, it still does bother me, because I remember, this, my new venture, which is a book subscription service, Sonya's Book Box. And I send, readers a book every month, depending on their taste. And it's because it's e-commerce, it doesn't make much money. And I don't want to scale it because it's a very personalized kind of service. I want to have fewer subscribers who I know very well. So it's kind of, it's sort of not it's not a viable business model in today's startup scale-up universe, right? And I remember one day sitting and I was like, but I'm not going to make any money at all with this. And then some, friend asked that, but does that matter that much? Yeah. I had to think about it, and I was like, okay, fine, that's all right. I'll do without the money. But it was still a thought.
Sonia, so much learning there from your experience. the first part, I loved the, your breaking down and really questioning what we've been all taught in business school, right? About the cost center, the profit center as black and white, and seeing that it's not. And I love the fact that you explore that in the topic of parenting and child rearing. And there's so much of creation of, value, and that value not being accounted for outside, and therefore not us not accounting for it inside, which is also where a lot of, and which frankly is, I think more people are bothered and worried about that than the outside, right? Or both, equally. So I loved your really you tearing those definitions of cost and center, apart in this context. And what it's also making me think is, even beyond parenting, right? In terms of just suppose we're learning, right? Suppose I decide to invest in my learning for the next 2 years. Is that cost or profit or investment in future revenue? Or does it even have to be revenue through that? In fact, this is leading the way for the next question that I'm going to ask you, which is about how you see your return on the time that you invest in your work. Because when we're working in the corporate world, it's often like your salary is your compensation for your time and attention. You put in this much of time, you put in your skills, and you get your money back. And that's how the cost and revenue is seen. But hearing you talk about Sonya's book box, which of course sounds like, if I may use the word, labor of love or just art of love, there's so much more to it. You're not looking at it just in terms of the money that it's going to bring to you, but in terms of other returns, not just to you, but also the reader and the person, right? Which is why you want to keep it small and personalized. So do you want to, talk a little about the way you see your current work in terms of the returns that you get and create? And because I think it would just blow open the worldview of so many other people who have been, like we were trained, right? Trained to think of it just in terms of paisa aaya, paisa gaya, and that's the cost and revenue.
Ramya, all those questions have been questions that I've wrestled with for a long time. And I think, again, reading has helped. When I read about the economic system and you read economists like the Korean economist Ha-Joon Chang, and you read, there's been a lot of writing recently that's questioned a lot of the fundamental values of capitalism, the building blocks of capitalism, including the whole idea of scale and productivity. And that's helped me a lot. And I think that's freed me to acknowledge to myself that for me, what's really, really important is the kind of impact that I have, and to be comfortable with putting that as my, return on effort. So I've often done teaching. And when one of the things that I did when my kids were very small is I had these 2 classes, and one was called Maths Cats and one was called Reading, Speaking Volumes, or Reading is Fun. And I do reading and I do maths, and we do things like bake a cake, where I would give them the units in a different form, so they had to convert the units and multiply it, and then go and look for treasure, and so they figure out their coordinate geometry and stuff like that. So I was just doing fun stuff essentially, but it was very rewarding in the sense that the kids would just love it. And even when I stopped wound down these classes, for years later I'd had people come and say, "Oh, are you doing it? I heard this particular child said they loved it so much, or they got into reading because of it. So are you going to do it? When are you going to start it again?" And that used to make me feel really nice. And so so for me now, I feel that this is what, if I can do this, say, introduce readers to books that they will enjoy, that'll give them like a window to something else, that'll teach them stuff and entertain them, then if I can kind of like make them, give them something that will help them sort of be happy. I know it sounds very trite and cliched, but that's really what it is. Like if somebody messages me or mails me and saying, "Oh, you sent me the perfect book. I loved it. It said my day is made. I'm really thrilled." And I'm like, I literally roam around that day like smiling, you know. So yeah. So therefore, and that's the other thing. So basically, my work today is that I have 3 streams of things that I do. And one stream is the journalistic writing, and I do that, like, during the pandemic, we were marooned in Himachal Pradesh at my grandparents' place. And so I did a lot for a year or so. I've done a lot of local stories that are Himachal based. And so I do stories, anything that's interesting that I investigate, I work on those. So there's always that journalistic writing and that stream. Then there is the Sonya's Book Box, which is the book subscription service where I kind of, I'm a literary matchmaker, so to speak. So I kind of, I talk to people and try and find out what book they like and send them that book. And the third is the leadership from literature. So which is, again, the subliminal lessons that you get from books. And that is, again, to people who are, say, from the ages of 18 to about 25. Which is, when you're impressionable, when you're looking at the world, you're looking at people, you have that idealism, you want to do things. So at that point, to put across to you books that will change the way you look at the world, for me, that's just so rewarding. So that is, and if I've done this, if I've given somebody a book where they like that character, or they relate to that character, and it gives them a sense of either trigger some questions in their head, or gives them, a sense of empathy, or a way to figure out characters, then I just feel happy about it. And so, yeah, so now I'm like, if I help people and I have that kind of impact, then I feel that the kind of time and energy I'm putting into what I do, it's worth it.
Wow. Sonia, I have so many more questions to ask you, but I'm going to try and pick the most important ones. So one of the reasons why it is so interesting to interview is because you're a classic example of someone who's doing multiple things and enjoying all of them. And each one sort of bringing out a different facet of your personality: the educator, the writer, the journalist, the matchmaker, and the one who wants to delight kids, right? And adults, actually, through reading, and the love. And of course, there is the uniting thread of, literature and reading and books, which is pretty core to you, as I can see. But I just want you to take our viewers through some of the pros and cons of an approach like this, where, the technical term for this is actually slash careers. Unfortunately, it's something that hasn't taken off very popularly. The term hasn't stuck, but the idea literally being when you're doing multiple things at the same time. And do you want to tell us about your experience with that? And I think it's a fascinating possibility that's open to all of us. I myself am someone who does multiple things, but I do think it would be lovely to hear both sides of, what that creates in your experience.
Ramya, that's a question that so many people ask, so it's so important. And my family, when I look back on my family, my grandfather used to be, he was a writer, but that was never his day job. He was in the civil service. And this is the same for my uncles as well. And I think they were able to do this because work was structured in such a way that it did give you that sort of time. It didn't kind of gobble your life and time and soul. And somewhere along the way, the whole corporate model became this, if you were seen to be leaving at 5:30, you're not a team player, sort of, where it was quantity above quality. And that made it really challenging and upsetting for a lot of people who had to kind of choose that you either, put your heart and soul into just one activity and don't have time to do something else if you want, to be on the fast track or to, make partner or make CEO or whatever it was. And so that choice was there. I do feel now, and we have three daughters, and two of them are entering the workforce, and third is in college, and so I look at it from a very personal point of view, that what are their lives going to be like, and I'm really happy to see that it does seem to me that there is a change happening, where there's a realization that it's okay if you do other things, and those things will probably cross fertilize what you do at work.
Love that word, cross-fertilize. Yes. And light you up, if not anything else, in the worst case, right? It would at least light you up. Yeah.
So I think that that's happening, and things like, it's been also accelerated by the pandemic and work from home and the ability. So the rigidities in the corporate world are, slowly being, whittled away slowly, and hopefully it's going to get better. So for people, I'm very optimistic about the future of work. I feel that you will have time, and there is a consciousness, there's a realization that it's good to do different things as well. So for people who are looking to do non 9 to 5 things, you can hold a job and still have the time and energy to do other things, and hopefully that's going to become easier and easier, because that's really so important.
Wow, lovely. Thank you. And I'm going to ask you a follow-up question on, something that you mentioned, the fast track. And I'm going to tie that in with something else that you talked about also, which are newer ways of looking at economy, looking at measure, looking at GDP, looking at productivity. And there is a whole slow movement, right? Where there was a time when speed was cherished and valued over everything else, faster, better. And I think in terms of life, people are proposing alternate models and, frameworks, if I may use the word, of looking at life and living. Let's bring that into the world of work as well, in terms of, we'd had the small discussion on impact and scalability already, which is bigger, need not necessarily be better for you. And what would you say about the same thing with, this whole speed obsession that we seem to have had as a culture?
So, I think one is already seeing the kind of backlash. If you look at, again, the world of books, there are lots of books that are getting into the pleasures of leisure, the necessity of leisure, how human beings work in bursts, and, creativity, especially. You don't have to be producing all the time. There's a lot of, the brain does a lot of thinking, even otherwise, when, you may be going for a walk or listening to music, and your brain is still on. So there's more and more of that coming out, and there are more and more advocates, very articulate, very fluent, and a lot of neuro research has gone into this. So hopefully there's going to be some balance. And the nature of work itself, I think, is, from that assembly line industrial kind of model, it's moving into something different. And so I would say that there is an alternative model. So if you're inclined to take things slower, there are a lot of now, there's, more role models, more literature, more validation, if you're looking for external validation, for that. So previously you would just be sort of written off as being lazy or a slacker. Now you can kind of say, I'm just a creative person. I'm thinking about things. I'm ruminating even as I, don't do anything.
Climb that ladder.
Yes.
Yeah, lovely. So Sonya, you've given us so much from your experience, literally. So thank you. And I'm going to ask you, and although you've given us lots of advice, if you were to summarize into your top 3 pieces of advice for anyone who's currently in a 9 to 5 regular salary job, contemplating the possibility of, could I create a life that would be more on my own terms, what would those pieces of advice be?
So I think the first would be that whatever you're interested in, just go look for the books that that talk about it. And there's a wealth of wisdom in those. So if you're looking at, say, if you like plants and trees, go read Lab Girl. That looks, it's a autobiography of a scientist that just puts it so beautifully. If you interior decoration, read Alain de Botton's Architecture of Happiness. If you're interested in food, there are lots of, fabulous food memoirs, and those itself will give you a good kind of, pull you into that world and kind of sort of show you the.
And you can sit in your living room and actually get so much from other people's experiences. Yeah.
So you get the rhythms and the possibilities. So that's the first. Just go look for the books in the vertical that you're interested in. The second would be, join groups. And today you have interesting communities and so many niche communities. They're online. You could have them on Slack, Discord, Reddit, WhatsApp, Facebook. They're offline as well. And one thing to remember is that, just as when you're in a corporate meeting and there's brainstorming going on and you're sort of juniorish, you do tell yourself, I should make a point here. I should say something, the famous class participation, right? So even in all of these, it's important initially, at least, to talk, to speak, to be an active part. So do that, I would say. So that was the second piece of advice. And the third actually follows from the first, where there's a lot of research that says that if you're interested in something, do make a project of it. So like, say, you have a lot of these books that say like the Happiness Project, or, you can work in bursts. So decide, all right, I'll do a month of this, or I'll do weekends for a month in this thing. So set yourself some like mini targets. So
like a prototype experiment.
Like a prototype, yeah. So maybe I'll run one workshop in this or something like that. And you don't have to see it as being a drastic decision. You can kind of just take it one step at a time, right? Like, I'm just going to do this for like a week and see how it goes, or a month, and then take a call.
Wow. Sonya, such valuable pieces of advice, seriously. And I love the second one that you gave because, many times we understand the importance of surrounding ourselves with, or at least being in the conversations of areas that we want to, and we might join the groups and then we'll sit quietly, listening. But it's only when we speak out that even other people have a chance to mentor us, correct us, sometimes maybe even kick us in the butt, but then we learn from that, right? So we need to make that, right? And speak up and actually engage. Thank you so much for that. And one final question, which is, what is one thing that you know now, which had you known several years ago in your very first job, would have made this entire journey more easy and joyful for you than it's been?
I think that I would have been less exacting with myself, and I would have, whatever if I wasn't, say, I would have been less dissatisfied with myself, and I would have, I would have just been less exacting. When I look back on a lot of situations, I feel that I can clearly see that it was the setup at that time that was really hard, and it was not me. And I just felt, I felt very often that, I haven't done this okay. I could have done this better. And I've been dissatisfied. And so I think I would have just savored whatever it was that I was doing a little more.
Wow. Thank you, Sonya. Thank you so much. And it's been a joy. I've learned so much, and I'm sure it's going to be a huge contribution to our viewers and anyone who's going to listen to this in the future. And just letting people know that we'll put more details about Sonya, where you can contact her, find out more about the wonderful work that she does in 3 different areas, in fact. And we'll put that in the description down below. And thank you, Sonya.
Thanks, Ramya. It's been such a fun discussion, and you've asked such interestingly analytical questions. It's helped me reflect as well. So thank you.
So glad. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
See you around. Bye-bye. If you are someone who's looking to craft your life and work in a way that is more in line with your inner rhythm, then do visit my website, www.craftingourlives.com. You'll find it in the description. because I have a host of resources put together for you, and this is based on 20 years of my own research and work with people as a coach in this area. I also have a free newsletter, so your starting points should be to sign up for my newsletter, subscribe to this channel to stay updated for further videos, and to go on to the edX site and look for my free MOOC course there titled Crafting Realities, Work, Happiness and Meaning, and then reach out to me if you need further assistance. I also offer private coaching, as well as I run group coaching sessions, and I also conduct residential retreats, and you can find all that information on my website or in the newsletter as and when we announce it.